In the forest near Harrenhal, Rhaegar stands alone in the empty spot where he has spent numerous nights with Lyanna, both dueling and talking and laughing. He sits under a tree as he thinks about what he just did. All the thoughts going through his head: his wife, Elia, his daughter, Rhaenys, his father, the Empire, and none of them truly making him feel purposeful, like Lyanna. It's there that the she-wolf also meets him again. She looks at him with confused eyes, the blue flowers in her hand. She demands to know what the meaning of this was. Why did he name her queen? His own wife was present. Rhaegar apologizes. He truly didn't mean any slight. Lyanna shakes her head. The whole occupation of Harrenhal is already calling it a scandal. Soon all the kingdoms will. They both argue as Lyanna tries to understand. But deep down, she already has a feeling, yet she suppresses those thoughts. Rhaegar eventually states that he did what seemed right in his heart. That's something you simply don't always understand. After some more arguing, she throws the flowers at him. She urges him to seek forgiveness with his wife and forget all of this. Their late night meetings here were clearly a mistake. Lyanna walks away, leaving the Dragon Prince alone with a twisted stomach. In their tent, Eddard and Benjen try their best to calm Brandon down. The older brother is furious. How dare that Targaryen prince dishonor their own sister like that, in front of all the noble houses of Westeros? Ned and Benjen agree but remain rather calm about it. As their father Rhaegar enters, he shares Brandon's feelings. Rhaegar should undo that action as soon as possible and name Elia Martell Queen of Love and Beauty, his own wife after all. Then this scandal shouldn't have to grow larger than it already has. When Lyanna enters, Brandon immediately asks her where she was. How does she feel? Lyanna remains strong, not showing any of her conflicted feelings. Brandon almost wants to storm out and challenge Rhaegar to a proper duel, but she stops him. As the whole family talks and talks, Robert Baratheon enters. Rhaegar suggests to leave Lyanna and her betrothed alone for a while. As Lyanna and Robert remain alone in the tent, she asks him not to be angry. Robert is surprisingly calm as well. He claims he views it more as a compliment. Besides, there's no denying Lyanna indeed is the most fair woman out of all those present here. That makes her smile, yet her heart keeps resisting. He kisses her hand again and does mention that Rhaegar should undo this action, for the sake of the realm and their alliance. Lyanna agrees, and still she has no idea what to think. Howland Reed is in his own tent as he spots one of those 3 squires who attacked him several days ago. The squire looks horrible and has several whip marks on his arm. Howland almost feels sympathy, yet it does comfort him that the honor of his house has been restored. He is visited by Eddard, who asks how he's feeling. Howland of course feels much better, but his thoughts do go out to Lyanna. The two of them also talk about what they think of the situation. Whatever happens, the final feast tonight will probably not have the same spirit as it should. Rhaegar walks through the camp as he gets a lot of queer-looking faces. He enters his own tent, where Elia was already waiting for him. The moment she sees him, she bows her head and asks for forgiveness. Rhaegar is confused by this. She starts to babble about how she has disappointed him in some way or another, otherwise he wouldn't have chosen someone else to be the queen of the tourney. She obviously feels guilty, but Rhaegar does comfort her, saying it's not her fault. However, when Elia asks him to explain himself, he can't. There's not a single word that he can use to explain his action. Elia eventually holds his hand tight and reminds him of their daughter who is still waiting for them. To think of her. Rhaegar nods his head and embraces his wife warmly, yet his heart sparks no warmth at all. It's then that Arthur Dayne enters the tent and informs the prince that the king wishes to see him. Rhaegar already prepares for the worst. In the main hall of the castle, Aerys sits on his throne as he looks at his son entering through the massive doors. His voice is bitter and angry. He asks what happened to make Rhaegar despise his own house so much. Is this how the Targaryen dynasty will die after all? If his own queen can't give him more sons and daughters, his only son will not even stay faithful to his own marriage? Rhaegar defends himself by saying his father never even was a supporter of his marriage to Elia in the first place. This is no business of his. Aerys bursts out in anger after hearing this. He is the king! The fate of his house, his empire is at stake. They are surrounded by enemies and traitors, and Rhaegar only makes it worse with this scandal. The entire hall is filled with the loud booming voices of the prince and king. All of the present Kingsguard members stand in silence. Arthur Dane looks to the ground, and Barristan Selmy has sad-looking eyes. After a long and hard fight, Rhaegar eventually gives up and kneels before his father, asking for forgiveness. Aerys snorts. After some silence, he orders Rhaegar to undo his action of calling out that she-wolf, and tomorrow he and his Dornish wife will head back to Dragonstone, away from the capital. Rhaegar feels his fists clenching, but he nods his head anyway. The prince leaves in silence, while the king gives one final roar of anger. At Casterly Rock, Lord Tywin Lannister sits in his office when he receives word from a messenger. He informs Tywin that his son Jaime has been chosen by King Aerys to become a Kingsguard member. Upon hearing this, Tywin remains calm and asks to be alone. The moment he's alone, however, he slams his fist on a table out of pure anger. Cersei is talking with several other girls along the castle walls. They also talk about how Jaime has been chosen to become an actual Kingsguard. Everyone is very excited, everyone except Cersei. She clearly has twisted feelings about the fact and remains silent for most of the time. Once she's alone in her chamber, she finds a drawing of her and her brother from when they were even younger. She looks and holds it tight in her hands, indicating how she does miss her brother a lot. At Harrenhal, the final feast of the tourney happens with only half of the atmosphere of the nights before. There's music and dancers, but everyone's a lot more quiet. Aerys sits in silence as he looks at everyone around the hall. Robert, Lyanna, Eddard, Howland, Brandon, Benjen, Rhaegar, Jon Arryn, all of them sit next to each other. All of them just talking, trying to forget what happened earlier this day. Several people look queer at Lyanna, making her nervous. Robert cheers her up, saying they're all just jealous of her. Eddard eventually points out how Princess Elia is present, but not Rhaegar. In fact, no one has seen him the last hours. Brandon is still angry and almost wants to confront the king himself about the matter, but his father Rickard stops him and urges his son to remain calm. Challenging the king will only lead to worse things. Brandon snorts, claiming not to be afraid. He simply wants to demand justice for his sister. While the night continues, everyone gets more and more drunk, especially Robert, as usual. As Lyanna notices how her betrothed starts to lose the ability to speak, she quietly leaves his company. She walks outside under the night sky by herself. She's joined by Eddard, who follows her. Eddard asks how she's truly feeling. Lyanna is honest, saying she doesn't know. She has a wedding to look forward to. Eddard shakes his head, claiming he knows her better than that. He knows her mind is somewhere else. Somewhere far away. They have a sweet moment where Eddard tries to show his love and care for her. While Lyanna truly appreciates that, she eventually leaves him be and wanders off alone. As Lyanna enters her tent, she suddenly finds the same blue winter roses again on her bed. She's almost startled. But for some reason, a smile appears on her face. This time, there's a letter as well, asking her to come to the open space in the woods. She does just that. She wanders in the dark forest alone, straight towards the open space, where she finds Rhaegar waiting for her. He looks beautiful in the moonlight. They look at each other as the prince reaches out, asking her to join him. After some thinking, she does. They walk through the woods as they eventually arrive at a small lake, glowing bright. It's beautiful. They enjoy the view as Rhaegar sings a soft hymn for her again. A variation of the same song he sang during the first feast, only this time with a much more uplifting tone. He sings for her as she enjoys and smiles. As he finishes, she asks what the song is about, since it's sung in High Valyrian. He tells her how it's a song about a knight wandering through war, trying to reach home again, where his love awaits him. Lyanna can't take her eyes off him. He's the most enchanting man she has ever seen. Rhaegar keeps on staring deeply into her eyes at the same time as they come closer and closer. Lyanna smiles and mentions how she's not some highborn lady with a fear of battle. Rhaegar smiles as well, saying he knows that. And that's what convinced him. And right there, underneath the moonlight, next to the small lake, the dragon and the wolf share a sweet and long kiss with each other. In a world of wolves and dragons, stags and lions, krakens and bears, Rhaegar and Lyanna are the only ones who matter in this moment. At the feast, Eddard and Benjen both manage to take a very drunk Robert to his tent. The man almost collapses on the floor, but still manages to thank the two of them. As Benjen also leaves for his bed, Ned wants to check up on Lyanna again. He quietly enters her tent, but sees she isn't there. He looks around to the forest, wondering where she might be. Elia lies alone in her tent, again, feeling sadness over her entire body. She looks at the empty space beside her, still waiting for her husband. Still waiting. At the lake, Rhaegar and Lyanna lay underneath a tree in each other's arms. They talk and have a conversation in which they talk about their childhoods. How Lyanna was raised to be a warrior but also a decent lady of her house. Rhaegar laughs as she tries to act tough, fully believing her fury. The talk turns more serious as the prince starts to talk about how he has been the only child of his father and mother for years. How his mother, Rhaella, has had more stillborn children than any mother should. And his father? That's a different story entirely. Lyanna does ask why he remains so loyal to a man he hates. Rhaegar claims he doesn't hate his father. How can he? He can never hate his own flesh and blood. But deep down, he knows the madness lurking inside Aerys. He knows all too well. They even talk about their marriages, how Lyanna has been betrothed to Robert for a very long time, yet her heart has never felt something for him. Rhaegar mentions the same. Marrying Elia seemed dutiful and good for the alliance, yet he never felt what he needed to feel. Lyanna eventually stands up and calls them both fools. What are they thinking? They could be punished severely for this night alone. Rhaegar understands but comforts her all the same. He knows it's a terrible risk, but what they feel for each other is something that's real, something pure, not bound by an alliance or duty or whatever. They feel something only so few people of their status actually feel for each other. Love. They stare at each other, thinking. They both have their future, both their responsibilities. They can't do this, but how they want to. After a long silence, Rhaegar kisses her again and mentions he might have an idea. That night, Rhaegar enters the tent of his wife. He lies next to her, but the two of them don't touch each other. It's deadly silent between the two. The following day, everyone departs Harrenhal to leave back to their homes. Elia is treated well by her handmaidens as she's visited again by Oberyn. They have a sweet farewell as also Oberyn wishes to see Rhaegar a final time. Elia urges him to let it be and leave for Sunspear. She doesn't want a fight to break out. Oberyn respects her wish and kisses his sister farewell. Robert wakes up with a booming head as he sees Lyanna standing next to him. He asks where she was last night, to which she simply mentions she was taking a walk, alone. All the lords and ladies head south, east, west or north with their caravans while Lord Went shows his gratitude and says his farewell to everyone. Especially the king's convoy departs with a loud sounds of booming horns and trumpets. No one sees the king or anything, yet everyone sees the prince. Rhaegar mounts his horse as he looks around for one last time. In the far distance, he sees Lyanna, both looking deeply in each other's eyes. They don't do anything else, however. Lyanna keeps on looking at him for as long as she can. Brandon, who is standing next to her, noticed him looking as well. He starts to get angry and protective again. How dare that man even look at Lyanna? Benjen again calms his older brother down while Lyanna simply stays silent. The she-wolf heads back to her tent a final time before they also start to pack. Very quickly, while no one is watching, she takes out the blue winter roses from Rhaegar again and smells them deeply. At Dragonstone, the prince and his betrothed arrive. Elia is completely exhausted but wishes to see her daughter. The servants take her to the young Rhaenys, who is sleeping in her crib. The mother embraces her daughter tight, happy to see her again. Rhaegar watches the two of them from a distance, with not a single emotion on his face. The king and his convoy also arrive back at King's Landing. Aerys storms out of his wagon and heads inside the Red Keep as fast as possible, ever scared of an assassination attempt or some sorts. His thoughts don't go to his wife, however, nor his newborn son. He immediately asks a servant where Jaime is. Aerys finds him in the courtyard wearing his new white cloak. Before Jaime can say anything, the king starts to accuse him of betrayal. It was he who humiliated those knights at the tourney. He was the knight who didn't want to expose his identity. Jaime has no idea what's happening and tries to defend himself. That angers the king even more, almost resulting in Aerys smacking Jaime down. It stops until Barristan comes in and begs the king for mercy. All the servants here are witnesses. All of them know Jaime has been here all this time, just like the king commanded. He wasn't a mystery knight. He couldn't have been. Eventually, the king calms down and leaves for his chamber. Jaime is partially shocked, having a bruise on his face. He thanks Barristan, to which Barristan gives a nod. Queen Rhaella lies in her bed with little Viserys in her arms. She hears all the noises from outside and asks the servants to bring her husband to her. As a servant enters Aerys' room to ask him to see his wife and son, the king throws a cup at her, ordering her to leave at once or she will be hanged. The servant heads back to Rhaella and tells her how the king doesn't wish to see her. Rhaella's face freezes and nods, not showing how her heart just broke into a million pieces. All the Northmen have set up camp somewhere along the King's Road, a huge camp while everyone is on their way back home. Robert and his friends again have a great time as they laugh and talk and have friendly duels. Rhaegar and his son Brandon have a talk as well as they walk through the woods. Brandon knows he's about to head back to Riverrun to marry Catelyn Tully at last, as will Jon Arryn marry Lysa. Rhaegar is so very proud of him and wishes him all the fortune he needs. For now, he and Jon will have to get back to Riverrun to prepare for the weddings to come. All the Stark siblings have a sweet farewell. Benjen, Ned, Lyanna, even Robert. All of them wish them safe travels. They will see each other again once the weddings will take place. And just like that, Brandon and Jon disappear into the fields again. That night, Robert plucks some flowers for Lyanna. This time, he even kneels to the ground for her as they stand in their tent. It's now that Robert shows a very caring and humble side of himself. He promises to be a good husband to her, to protect her, to serve as a dutiful husband. With all his heart, he will try. Lyanna accepts the flower and thanks him dearly. Robert smiles and again kisses her hand. Once Lyanna is alone again, she puts the flowers away and again grabs the blue winter roses from Rhaegar, which she has kept hidden. She looks at them for a long time. At Dragonstone, Rhaegar and Elia are intimate again. As the sea clashes hard outside, Rhaegar does his duty with his wife, yet not a single thought goes out to her. In his mind, he only sees one, the only one he wishes to see. They make love, yet the love isn't there. That night, they both lie next to each other. Elia is sleeping softly while Rhaegar is still wide awake. He looks at her, sighing. He eventually stands up and goes to the balcony, feeling the wind through his white hair. He thinks and thinks, but he knows what he wants to do. Eventually the man is dressed up and leaves a letter for Elia beside her bed. He visits his daughter Rhaenys and kisses her on the forehead. He truly does love her, and that's why he begs her forgiveness for what he's about to do. In the dark of night, the prince sails away from Dragonstone without anyone noticing, away from his duty, away from his life. At the camp in the north, Robert is sleeping and snoring as well. Lyanna stands beside him, also dressed up. She looks at him and also sighs, yet not begging forgiveness. The following morning, Robert wakes up and notices Lyanna gone. He doesn't make much of it. He stands up and greets many of his men outside. As he meets Eddard, the wolf asks him how Lyanna is doing. That startles Robert, since he thought Lyanna was with her family. Ned shakes his head, claiming they all saw her inside her own tent last time. Robert runs back and searches for her, not finding anything. It's then that he starts to ask numerous people if they saw her, but no one has. Eddard also starts to get worried now and informs his father and brother. Rhaegar even announces the entire camp to search for her. Robert is getting more and more troubled every minute. He even yells for her, "Lyanna! Lyanna!" Yet not a single answer, only the cold wind. Eddard tries to calm his friend down, but without success. Eventually a servant comes out riding from the woods and says it for everyone to hear. She's gone. Lyanna Stark is gone.